Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, on a Monday, August 26th. The preseason now behind us, now entering a whole new week, less than 2 weeks to go until the start of the NFL regular season. And to start the week, we have a lot of big decisions being made already, and also some yet to be made that we will be discussing on today's show. One of the biggest ones to have been made already is already known that CeeDee Lamb and the Dallas Cowboys have agreed to that contract extension, so we're going to talk about that. That news actually broke a few hours ago. Then, similarly, DaRon Bland on the other side of the football for the Dallas Cowboys, he had to undergo surgery recently, and now he will be out for the next month and a half. How will that impact the Dallas Cowboys defense for the first part of the regular season? And also touching on the Steelers quarterback battle, a decision to come later this week by Mike Tomlin as he announced it after their last preseason game, and a couple more topics to go later on in the show. Make sure to stay tuned for those. But also, before I get started, it's always much better when you guys interact with this show. I am always curious to know what you guys are thinking, any of your opinions on any of the topics I say, or any of my comments that I make on those topics. So, to keep that going, to make this show as interactive as possible, there's an easy way to go about that now by using the super chat feature that we have available to you guys as of now. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the super chat button, and let's keep this show as exciting and interactive as possible. But there's also that alternative option if you do prefer that, the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. Still, you're able to use that, tip and donate there, and leave a comment or question there if you prefer that old method. But we couldn't do this show without your amazing support, and we are always so thankful that you guys are part of our community and support this channel as well. But with that being the case now, the biggest piece of news that we have to discuss right here to kick off the show, just breaking news earlier today around 2 o'clock Eastern Time, we finally got a breakthrough on the Dallas Cowboys and CeeDee Lamb situation. News broke around 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon for the Dallas Cowboys agreeing with their all-pro wide receiver CeeDee Lamb to a contract, a 4-year contract, $136 million for the all-pro receiver CeeDee Lamb. One of the two last remaining deals for the Dallas Cowboys, at least, to finally get resolved here. And I don't like to say I told you so, but I've been saying for a couple weeks now, a couple days, that I'm feeling that it's going to be CeeDee. I predicted in the last segment I made about Brandon Ayuk, Jamar Chase, and CeeDee Lamb that Lamb was probably going to get the extension, and it was more and more starting to feel like the Cowboys, in regards to Dak Prescott, and just the matter of how CeeDee Lamb went about this, he's the one that held out, he's the one that hasn't said anything, he's the one that pretty much has made the Dallas Cowboys take every step necessary to get this done, and almost not doing anything put even more pressure than, say, Dak Prescott did, obviously showing up, commenting on the contract negotiations, and almost giving the same answer. But for the Cowboys, would you want to extend the guy that, isn't there, is threatening to possibly sit out of the regular season, or are you going to feel more of an urgent need to extend the guy that's being a good sport about it, always there, present, showing up for his team? Yeah, Dak might seem, in hindsight, as more of a team player, more team-oriented, not so selfish, if some people want to use that word to describe CeeDee Lamb, but, CeeDee Lamb's the one that got the extension, and that's ultimately what these players are after, and that's, ultimately the fairest way of going about this, for how much CeeDee Lamb put into this past season and how important he was actually for the Dallas Cowboys. It is very well deserved. It's much deserved for CeeDee Lamb to get this extension, and on that 4-year, $136 million deal, add $34 million as a salary per year for those 4 years, CeeDee Lamb now becomes the highest paid wide receiver, or the second highest paid wide receiver in the NFL, just $1 million below the $35 million to Justin Jefferson. Also, he's the second highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, and more details into this contract because it was very much record-setting, as you're going to see over the next few days. $100 million guaranteed also to CeeDee Lamb, is tied for the fourth most ever given to non-quarterbacks. The most guaranteed money given to a non-quarterback is still Nick Bosa at $122.5 million, then Justin Jefferson, then Joey Bosa, and then tied for fourth is CeeDee Lamb and Myles Garrett at $100 million each for their respective contracts. And also, lastly, the $38 million signing bonus that CeeDee Lamb will also get is the largest ever given to a wide receiver in NFL history. So a lot of landmarks reached with this deal. While he might not be the highest paid wide receiver, he's pretty much there. And 1A, 1B situation with him and Justin Jefferson. Last year, CeeDee Lamb was up there for the best wide receiver in the NFL with Tyreek Hill. And you could still argue Justin Jefferson, but he, missed a bunch of games. I think he only played in about 10 or 11. And, that hindered his ability last year if you're just going to go off of 2023. But you can't go wrong with either of them. Those two, Jamar Chase, who is still in line for a contract, Tyreek Hill, and all these guys, there's no surprise that the wide receiver market has just exploded, and this is just another wide receiver added to the list of probably almost 15 or something around that. I forgot to take count, but there's been a lot just this offseason. So many wide receivers have gotten extended, and now for those that have extended to $28, $25 million per year, it probably seems like such a bargain now to get a guy like Nico Collins or Jalen Waddle or someone like that for that amount of price, because this is only going to go up. This is only going to go up because now you start thinking about Jamar Chase, right? And while he's still 2 years away from really pushing that deadline to, need to be extended, he's made it pretty evident that this year he would like to get a deal done before the start of the regular season. And now, if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, because it seemed like they weren't so inclined to extend them this offseason for whatever reason, if they couldn't or they just simply didn't want to just this offseason, because in all honesty, they didn't have to, like CeeDee, like Brandon Ayuk. There's no reason for them to go up to Jamar Chase with anything else than $34 million per year. It just wouldn't make sense, and Jamar Chase, I doubt, would even entertain that possibility of earning less than $34-35 million per year, because rightly so, he should compare himself right up there with CeeDee Lamb, his former teammate Justin Jefferson. He probably believes that he should be earning at least what they're making, if not more. So you could look at it now, obviously, in hindsight, like the Bengals sort of screwed up here a little bit just by not, beating the Cowboys to the finish line and trying to jump them and paying a little bit less, because if Jamar Chase got a contract extension for $34-35 million, then maybe CeeDee Lamb takes a step back and says, well, hold up, I'm not going to take that now because I think I should be making more than Jamar because I had a better season than him last year. And then it gets extended on. So the Cowboys doing a very good thing, rarely this offseason, extending their wide receiver. I felt that this one was more necessary just because, again, of all those reasons I mentioned at the start of the segment. And now, this ultimately ends the holdout for CeeDee Lamb. I'm sure he'll return to practice either tomorrow or the day after that. And he is still set to play 2024 on his fifth-year option. He is due to make $17.9 million per year, or just this year for his fifth-year option. And then the extension, compensation starts to kick in 2025. But this new extension, signs CeeDee Lamb through the 2028 year. And just some of the accolades that come along with CeeDee Lamb. Just named to the Pro Bowl last year, 3-time Pro Bowler, 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Led the NFL in receptions last year with 135, and he tacked on over 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns on top of that. Huge resource and a huge reason why the Cowboys were so successful last year. This is the guy that you needed to have out there, and at least for Dak in this situation, I believe that if you can't get an extension done with Dak now, it does complicate it a little bit. I won't completely rule it out. I think it's impossible now, but to have it done before the start of the regular season with, I think, Now, 13 days left to go until their first Week 1 matchup against the Cleveland Browns. I just find it hard to believe that they're going to get both done in this limited amount of time, and especially if they don't get it done this week. Next week is pretty much a work week. Next week is the first week where we'll have football in that week, so they're going to be focused on practice and preparing for the Cleveland Browns. I don't know how much contract talks we're going to have in that time period, so this is one of the big dominoes to fall, of those three, CeeDee, Brandon, and Ja'Marr Chase, obviously. I already mentioned Ja'Marr Chase shouldn't look at anything less than $34 million. And Brandon Ayuk, same thing. I don't know how this would affect the price, if Brandon might want more now, or if he'll stay around the same price, or if the 49ers are willing to move on from their position. But same thing with him. This week should be key to finally get a resolution. I know I've been saying that probably for a couple weeks now, but like I mentioned, next week is a work week. Next week we're going to have two football games during the week on Friday and Thursday. So I don't know how much time there's really going to be and how much preparation Brandon Ayuk is going to have needed for that Week 1 matchup against the New York Jets. So waiting all this time, putting it off closer and closer to the regular season, it makes it so much more important and significant for one of those dominoes to fall, and being the first one in CeeDee Lamb, it benefits the Dallas Cowboys a lot. Now he's certainly going to be there against the Cleveland Browns, and against that defense, they were certainly going to need him, and they were certainly going to miss him if he wasn't there, but now they don't have to worry about that. Congratulations to CeeDee Lamb for making a ton of money. He definitely deserved it after 2023, but that'll conclude that segment on CeeDee Lamb. We're not going to go too far off of the Dallas Cowboys because while that is good news, there was some bad news that happened last week in regard to their other side of the football with their star defensive back, DaRon Bland. He suffered a stress fracture and now is set to be on the shelf for about 6 to 8 weeks. So I'll give you guys all the details around that and what games he could miss and when we could potentially see him back for the start of the regular season. So don't go anywhere. A lot more to talk about on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. Some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Jumping straight back into all the football news on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, we're continuing to talk about the Dallas Cowboys in this week's episode. Today's episode, now finishing talking about CeeDee Lamb and his contract extension. Great news for the Dallas Cowboys, but now some unfortunate news on the other side of the ball for one of their defensive backs. That would be DaRon Bland, because last week, in the preparation to their final preseason game, no starters were really going to play. It was really the Trey Lance show. He played the entire game pretty much, and, it was all about the backups and getting the necessary reps to make any final decisions on the final 53-man rosters that have to be finalized by tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. But in the lead up to that, one of their final practices before their Saturday game, Their all-pro defensive back, DaRon Bland, was feeling some discomfort in his foot on Wednesday during their practice, and then afterwards, he got more of an evaluation done on his foot, and the scans and the examinations revealed that there was a stress fracture in DaRon Bland's foot, which now means he will have to undergo surgery, and he'll likely be out for the next 6 to 8 weeks, which is pretty crushing for the Dallas Cowboys just because of everything that was swirling around them. If they didn't get that CeeDee Lamb extension done just today, this would have looked a lot worse than in hindsight, in totality, obviously, if they still didn't have their wide receiver there, and now their top one or top two corner was going to be out for pretty much the first month and a half. This would have almost been the worst case scenario for the Dallas Cowboys, so fortunate for them, they got it together and extended CeeDee Lamb. But more on DaRon Bland, based on his timeline and the 6 to 8 weeks that he's projected to miss for the start of the regular season. The first 4 weeks of the season, he will most likely miss if he is going to be out about 6 weeks at the earliest. So in terms of the Cowboys schedule and the teams they'll be playing, the first week 1 matchup, it'll be against the Cleveland Browns. So that one's going to hurt, not having DaRon Bland out there. You're going to have Trayvon Diggs obviously back, but it would have helped a lot to have him there, switching on and off with Amari Cooper, not just having Amari motion over to the other side of the field and be away from one of your top corners. That's the luxury you have, obviously, right, with having Bland and Trayvon Diggs. But now that could be a potential issue, and also the Browns added Jerry Jeudy, who is trying to rebuild and reestablish himself in a new situation, now moving on from the Denver Broncos. So that'll be an interesting one, not having DaRon Bland, especially at Cleveland. It should make it a bit tougher, obviously, against that defense, not to mention as well for the Dallas Cowboys. And also, week 2, they're going to be at home, their home opener against the New Orleans Saints, and it should be a little bit easier on paper, but honestly, I had so many questions about this Cowboys roster and just team and how it was going to look. I honestly didn't think CeeDee Lamb would be back. I felt like the Cowboys were just going to keep stalling, but that should be a win in week 2 at home in Dallas against the New Orleans Saints. And then you move on to week 3 at home again against the Baltimore Ravens, and you're hosting the current AFC conference appearance team. They didn't win the conference championship. I almost said they did, but they made it there at least. And coming off of the bat of last year, how successful they were. Now another year for Zay Flowers, another year for Lamar, getting further in the playoffs. Not to mention they add Derrick Henry. Yeah, they might not have wide receivers that you might technically not need to have a DaRon Bland or a Trayvon Diggs completely shut down, but still, this offense is very, very explosive now with the combination of Lamar and Derrick Henry. Those guys, more often than not, are going to have to tackle one of these guys, one of these runners, instead of covering. So that going up against a high-powered Ravens offense should be a little bit more tricky, but not as hard as having, a number one, a 1B type of receiver on the opposite sideline. So that one could go either way. I might still give it to the Ravens, but either result wouldn't surprise me. Then the last one that DaRon Bland would for sure miss would be at the New York Giants, and the Giants are the Giants, right? In New York, I can't remember the last time the Giants beat the Dallas Cowboys, so that should be a win. And if you go 2-4, if you win 2 of the 4 games to start the year of those first 4 weeks, if you split it, that's not the end of the world. Technically, I think that's as good as you'd like to finish in those games. If you win the Baltimore game, that's even better. But overall, and even the Cleveland game, that was 92 impossible to win. But those are definitely the tougher ones. They should win against the Saints, and they should win against the Giants, even without DaRon Bland. But that's at the earliest expected return date for DaRon Bland, because then he has a chance to return at Pittsburgh in their following game after the New York Giants, but that's about 6 weeks, so he could technically take longer, and that's when it gets a little bit more difficult, because at Pittsburgh is already going to be a little bit tougher than, say, the Giants and the Saints, and around the same level of difficulty as the Cleveland Browns. So to not have him there, yeah, the Steelers don't have, again, two great wide receiver ones. They only pretty much have one with George Pickens, but it's still on the road. You're still traveling across the country, and those games could get a little bit tricky if you don't address the situation right from the start. And then after that, if DaRon Bland is still trying to get back, you don't want to rush him, but he is getting closer and closer. After Pittsburgh, they have a home game against the Detroit Lions, so that's a little bit better. But, you have to monitor how DaRon Bland is looking. And then they're going to travel to San Francisco and play the reigning NFC Conference champions in the 49ers. And that's ideally, you'd like to have him back for one of these games at least, at Pittsburgh and then going on at the Lions and going on. You don't want him to miss all three of those games because, yeah, he might be getting extra rest, but all those games could, worst case scenario, go wrong. The only one that I'm sure they're more favored in is against Pittsburgh, and that's, again, on the road. It could get a little bit tricky if you don't handle your business. So that's a tough stretch of games that you would like DaRon Bland to come back, hopefully, if he's able. And, talking more about Bland and what he actually brings, if you haven't really been keeping up with who he is and how big of an impact he made last year, just going into his third season, 25 years old now. He led the NFL with 9 interceptions last year, and he set a new NFL record with 5 pick sixes as well. 5 of the 9 interceptions he returned for touchdowns, and that's 45 points, if my math is correct, on those touchdowns. So those are huge. Those are huge because not only is the Dallas Cowboys offense, really good, but for those odd games where they're struggling, they can't get anything going, or the opposing defense is just that good, and it's just a slugfest, low-scoring game. Getting someone to change the course, the momentum, just the entire vibe around a game with a pick six or just an interception in general with 9 last year is huge, and it's something that the Cowboys defense really thrived off of last year because they weren't so dominant in stopping the run. They weren't so dominant in stopping the pass per se. Big part of that is not having Trayvon Diggs, obviously, and then the Cowboys' run defense has been a problem for the last few years, but those turnovers really kill any sort of good feeling, any sort of momentum that the opposing offense is starting to generate. You almost feel like you have your backs against the wall, you're almost backpedaling, and you can't stop an opposing offense, but just out of nowhere, DaRon Bland comes out of nowhere, jumps a pass, or he reads it perfectly and gets an interception, and that way it stops everything and it shocks the opposing offense that way. And now, if he starts building that reputation, you're almost, I wouldn't say afraid, but you're a little bit more cautious throwing it over to that side of the field because if you're a little bit late or if it's not placed in the right situation for your guy to get it or for it to just go out of bounds, more often than not, he's going to make a play on it, and then that way you don't want to ruin the game if you're an opposing quarterback and throw him an interception, right? And not to mention that, but the Cowboys were looking so forward to having that partnership with Bland and Trayvon Diggs on either side of the ball because similarly to Trayvon Diggs about 2 seasons ago, they were almost in the same situation. Trayvon Diggs picked off every ball, it seemed like, that came his way. And now you had 2 of those guys being turnover machines. It was going to be a lot of fun, ideally, for the Dallas Cowboys defense if they did lose a lot of guys. Just this offseason, they had Leighton Vander Esch retired. Dorrance Armstrong went to the Commanders. Stephon Gilmore signed with the Minnesota Vikings. Dante Fowler Jr. also went to the Commanders as well. You lost a lot of guys, but you still had the opportunity, the chance to change the entire course of a game by having guys like that in the secondary to get interceptions, and not even that, just get pick sixes would have been great. But now that's going to have to be put on hold for the foreseeable future. And we'll see. We'll see how long DaRon Bland comes back and how much this Cowboys defense needs him because there's going to be a lot of new pieces. I think they lost, I'm trying to remember his name. I don't want to mess it up. I think it was Sam Williams, their pass rusher, that they lost to a torn ACL earlier this offseason. So that sort of affected the pass rush. You don't know who else is going to step up outside of Micah Parsons and who's going to be in at linebacker as well. You have a new defensive coordinator coming in, and while it's Mike Zimmer, an established, well-known name on that side of the ball, it is, a new group of players trying to adjust to a new system, and you want to have all your best players there, right? That's why it was such a big deal when Micah wasn't there, but now you get him back, but unfortunately you lose DaRon Bland. So it's just another hurdle. All teams deal with injuries like this. A bunch of teams have had season-ending injuries already to some of their most prominent players, but this Cowboys defense should be, I don't expect them to fall off of the face of the earth, but this does raise some more difficulty, and it does put a little bit more stress on the offense to maybe know now that this defense might not be as locked down as it was before. So the margin of error shrinks a little bit because you don't have that leeway knowing that you can just get a turnover, know that your defense is going to stop them. More pressure on the offense and an offensive side of the ball that has more questions, I would even say, than the defensive side of the ball. So how they ramify that will be something to keep an eye on. But for right now, that is all the news we have on the Dallas Cowboys. We're going to move on to some other topics on today's show. When we come back after the break, Mike Tomlin, the head coach of the Steelers, announces that he will make a final decision on his starting quarterback after this week of practice. And later on, we're going to dissect the quarterback performances from Drake Maye and Jacoby Brissett in their final preseason game last night. We're going to get into all of that when we return after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast and some more quarterback news, obviously continuing from the trends that we have seen just over the course of this offseason. We're going to talk about one of the quarterback battles, the one regarding the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we now finally have a deadline, I guess you could say, on when Mike Tomlin and the Steelers will announce whether it's going to be Russell Wilson, whether it's going to be Justin Fields. A lot of people have diverse opinions on who the quarterback should be. I feel like a lot of people, I think over the last few days that I've seen, feel that it should be Justin Fields or that Justin Fields offers more. But I'm still nailed into the fact that I think Russell Wilson just gives you the best opportunity now for a few reasons, and I'm gonna get into those later on. But for right now, we're gonna talk about just their final preseason game and leading up to that, what Mike Tomlin said afterwards in regards to his decision. But the Steelers officially finished the preseason going 0-3 after losing to the Lions on Saturday. It was not the I don't want to say it wasn't the best showing, but in context, knowing that you lost the game, and while your starters weren't out there for that long, the Lions didn't play any of their starters. So the fact that you still lost, into the course of that game doesn't paint the best picture for the Steelers, but I'm not really too bothered about that. The preseason is whatever. It's more so just to get guys ready, but a lot of people were watching how Russell Wilson not only responded to last week, just getting sacked every time he touched the ball, but also how the offensive line responded to that. Will this first-team offense finally get anything cooking? And it started off pretty positively. They scored on that drive, the only drive that Russell Wilson got. He, was out there starting the game, and He only played one drive, like I mentioned, but they did score that touchdown. Cordell Patterson ran it in. But throughout that drive, Russell Wilson finished his entire day being 2 for 2 for about 30-something yards. The highlight play for him was a nice sideline throw to the left sideline, if I remember correctly, for George Pickens, for a big gain. And then after that, it was more based on the run. They had that long run for Cordell Patterson. I think it was like 30-something yards. And that was pretty much it for Russell Wilson on the day, only playing one drive. And then Justin Fields comes in right after for the second drive of the game, and he pretty much finished his day 3 for 4 for 40 yards, also leading a touchdown drive, another rushing touchdown for the Steelers. And he did get more drives for the Steelers at the end of the day. Russ only had that one out there. He looked good, I guess, for Mike Tomlin, and he decided to sit him. Justin had a couple leading into halftime, or not even halftime, I think he got pulled before that into the second quarter, and they didn't have too much to show, I guess, compared to the other two games that they played. Justin Fields also made a couple nice throws, a more relaxed game, it seemed, for him, showing off his legs a little bit more, some anticipated throws. He had a really nice one down the seam, down the middle of the field to one of their tight ends, which was a high-level throw, and for any Steelers fans, it seems like the middle of the field is off limits, it seems, the last few years for the limited amount of throws that have gone to that area. To see one there put in a good spot for the tight end to high point it a little bit was a good sight to see, but there was a bad play for Justin Fields, and in an exchange with Zach Frazier, there was a mistake with the timing of the snap. Frazier snapped it without, it seemed like Justin Fields knew that it was coming, so that was a bad play, and you pile that up with the mishandled snaps that he already had leading up into that game. I think it was their first preseason game against the Houston Texans. Not the best showing, but I think it doesn't negate the fact that Justin, I thought, did an all right job, a decent job for coming in, playing with some of the backups a little bit. Then he gets pulled and into halftime, and the rest of the game, it was pretty much Kyle Allen and their fourth-string quarterback going out there. But now after the game, everyone's looking to Mike Tomlin, seeing if he'll give an answer, if he'll give any sort of hint as to who the quarterback will be. And I think he did give it, but in terms of what he actually said, this is the statement he made after the game. He said, "We'll make a decision at the end of our work week this upcoming week. We have 3 days of Steelers versus Steelers work, and why not do it then? It kind of minimizes the Steelers versus Steelers work when we start making decisions prior to the completion of that." And back to what I mentioned at the start of this segment, any sort of hint, any sort of sign that kind of leads you to believe what Mike Tomlin is thinking, I think all you have to do is look at the fact that Russ only played one drive, and that should tell you your answer right away. You don't leave your starting quarterback out there for more than a drive or anything like that, 2 at most, if he is ultimately going to be your starter. The last week of preseason, hardly anybody played their starters, at least in comparison to the other weeks. So the fact that Russ went out there one drive, they scored, and that was pretty much it. And then Justin came in, not starting again, playing with the twos and playing a few more drives. That to me just screams that Russ pretty much has won this job, if even it was a competition. I saw that being brought up on some shows just today on ESPN or whatever show I was watching. And, people just felt that this never really was a quarterback competition. And to anybody that felt, I guess, a little misled by Mike Tomlin's comments, I would just reference the fact that anytime they asked him about it, anytime that they asked if Justin did enough to exceed what Russell Wilson, played, or how Russell Wilson played, if there was any sort of shift in Mike Tomlin's thinking, I would just reference the fact that Mike Tomlin kept saying that, no, Russell Wilson was still in pole position to be the starter. That's all he kept saying to any answer that, or to any question that he would be asked about who the starting quarterback will be. So if anybody today, tomorrow, or any time regarding this quarterback competition felt misled or felt tricked by Mike Tomlin. He never wavered from that stance. So to me, it always felt like it was going to be Russell Wilson. I felt that it should have been Russell Wilson for the fact that I mentioned it briefly last week that right now it just feels like you have more to lose by starting Justin Fields than Russell Wilson at this point in time. And I don't mean that in any sort of negative way. I like what Justin Fields brings. I like that he's a running quarterback and that he's able to use his legs. I would love for eventually Justin Fields to be the quarterback going forward. But I just feel like right now, both of them starting on a new team and Russ having the pedigree, the resume, and everything like that, I think that suits this young, fairly inexperienced team with a very young offensive line to have an experienced guy back there that has been exposed to a lot of different situations, has seen almost all the coverages you could throw at him, at least for the start of the year, because, it goes back to those comments that Tom Brady made, that Bill Parcells made, that we addressed on the show as well. A lot of pressure gets put on these rookies to start right away, and I know Justin's not a rookie by any means, but the kind of support and preparation he got at Chicago, you can see that that was not what was needed or what was needed for him to progress in the NFL. And now heading into a whole nother system, a whole new city, and almost essentially starting all over again, it just feels like Russ was better suited to start right now, because if you did throw Justin Fields out there and he didn't perform as well or he struggled right away, it would have been, you were almost killing two birds with one stone there, because now not only do you pull Justin Fields early, so you eliminate that option, but if you bring in Russ, he might be a little bit salty about the whole situation, and on top of that, if he doesn't play any better, then you have no options to go to. Then you can't go back to Justin really and throw him back out there, because you can't just keep switching between these two quarterbacks to see if hopefully one week one plays better than the other. That can't happen, not at this level at least in the NFL. So at least for the first couple weeks, you look at the schedule for the Steelers. They're at Atlanta for the first one. You have that Arthur Smith revenge game there. In a hostile environment like Atlanta with all the excitement, I would like to see the veteran presence there, if you will, for the Steelers. And then the second week, Russell Wilson was always going to play that game. It was too good not to. Against the Denver Broncos in Denver, like, come on, Russ was going to play that game, right? And then you have the home opener against the Los Angeles Chargers. If the first 2 weeks go great, that one at home should be hopefully a little bit easier for a new-look Chargers team. And then you have at Indianapolis, again, another road environment for what I would feel more comfortable with an experienced quarterback out there. And then you have another home game versus the Dallas Cowboys. Pretty tough start to the season, and I think throwing Russ out there with little, I wouldn't say little expectations, but not as much pressure on his shoulders, I believe, just because, again, of his legacy and his history as the starting quarterback. It seems like it would be your best bet for this team that needs to get off to a better start than they have the last few years, especially last year where they got smoked at home to the 49ers. So I would just feel more comfortable with Russ maneuvering those situations, those visiting environments, than I would with Justin Fields. And maybe if by like week 6, that's when I would start to entertain the possibility of Justin Fields coming in, maybe if maybe the game against the Colts or the Cowboys goes bad or the Chargers doesn't go as well. Week 6 could be a time where you start to explore that opportunity of bringing back or bringing in Justin Fields to be that starter at the Las Vegas Raiders. No shade to the Raiders, they're not really considered a top team yet, so it would be an easier situation for them to come into if you're Justin Fields. So that's really where I'm at. Mike Tomlin says that he'll have an answer at the end of this week, but I'm pretty sure most of us know that it will be Russell Wilson. It'll be an absolute shell shock if it's not Russell Wilson and if it is Justin Fields. And I'll come on here and tell you guys how surprised I am, but it should be Russell Wilson from what everybody's saying and just from my general knowledge of the situation. So with that being said, we're going to put a pin on that and revise that when the announcement is officially made. But for right now, we're going to move on to the next break of our show and talk about some more quarterback talk, and Drake Maye and Jacoby Brissett. They played their final game of the preseason last night. Drake Maye impressed very much. He continued to impress, and there was an injury scare with Jacoby Brissett in the first drive that he had. He injured his shoulder. He didn't return, and what is his status and how could that affect the quarterback battle going forward? I'll address that in a few seconds. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you for joining me back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on some more quarterback talk, some more quarterback competitions here, this time with the New England Patriots. We're going to talk about Drake Maye and Jacoby Brissett, obviously from last night in their game against the Washington Commanders. It was a loss, but again, the results of the game don't really matter, especially when you're dealing with a situation like who your starting quarterback is going to be, and all eyes were on those two guys, and Jacoby did start the game once again, and during his first drive, he did get sacked by an unblocked KJ Henry, and he sort of, not blindsided him, but I don't think, obviously, Jacoby knew or was thinking that KJ Henry was going to come so quickly towards his right side. He sacks him, and he almost drops almost all of his body weight on that right shoulder. He fell to his left side, but a lot of weight came down on that right shoulder, and he was shaken up a little bit. He was grimacing, but he did finish the drive, and he went to the sideline. It seemed like there was no real issue too much, but that was pretty much it for Jacoby. He didn't come back. He was questionable to return because of a shoulder injury, and because of that, Drake Maye, I think, came in a little bit earlier than a lot of people were anticipating, at least I was, just because with Drake Maye and the way that he was talking about it, especially after last week, saying that the quarterback battle was pretty much open, that there wasn't too big of a gap between Drake Maye and Jacoby, it started to seem like there was a chance, right? So this final preseason game was going to be a big indicator on how this was all going to pan out, and now that you got Jacoby hurt, for a moment, I'm thinking, like, this is Drake Maye's job. This is going to be his job because Jacoby's hurt, especially to his right shoulder. It was a little bit worrying, but Isaac Delgado here. Hey, GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. How you doing? Welcome to the show. You tuned in for a good one, talking about this Patriots quarterback battle here, deciphering on who is going to be the starter, right, because of what we saw last night. And Drake Maye, once he came in, I don't think too many people were surprised with how well he played, just because there were those reports from practice. There was the last preseason game, and more people were starting to fall in love with the idea that Drake Maye, why not Drake Maye? Why not give him the opportunity to start in this Patriots team where you could look at the same situation and think completely different things about it, right? Because the same situation, the scenario is that this Patriots team is not really going to contend for any sort of playoff scenarios or anything like that. So what does it matter, right? Why not throw the kid out there? But in that same breath, while there might not be anything to play for in terms of playoffs or divisions or anything like that, you do still have a lot to lose if you throw Drake Maye out there. And yeah, you're not playing for anything, but you end up losing potentially that confidence, the hype, the optimism around Drake Maye if he goes out there and just isn't prepared, throws a couple interceptions, and just not playing good. That is something you could lose. So that to me is why I feel a little bit more reserved as to starting Drake Maye right away. But in terms of how he played last night and sort of fanning that fire to be that starter for the New England Patriots, the Patriots, came back out and Drake Maye was in at quarterback right away, and there was no specific diagnosis before I go on to Drake Maye on what the injury was to Jacoby, so we'll still keep an eye out on that. But when Drake Maye came in, he impressed right away just with his first drive, converting a 3rd and 14 right away with a 17-yard run, showing off his legs a little bit there, showing off the dynamism that he brings as a quarterback. So that was nice to see. And then he follows that up with another 3rd down conversion, a 3rd and 2, with a 29-yard throw to fellow rookie wide receiver Jalen Polk. So converting, great sign for Drake Maye right off the bat. And he ends that drive with a little dump pass off to running back Kevin Harris, and he throws another touchdown, right? His first drive, he finished 5 for 6 for 71 yards, 1 touchdown in that one drive. And he finished off his entire night being 13 for 20, 126 yards with 1 touchdown to end the first half. And that was pretty much the end of Drake Maye in that preseason game. So limited amount of time being thrown out there, but still pretty efficient night overall. 13 of 20 and 126 in terms of yards. Pretty decent for Drake Maye, but also something that isn't brought up a lot is still the struggles that the Patriots offensive line still has with just protecting Drake Maye or any quarterback that's back there. That still seems to be the overshadowing issue, whether or not it's Jacoby or Drake. If you don't have anybody blocking or if they can't hold it up long enough, it's not going to matter who the quarterback is out there. So, if anything, it gives you more reason to not start Drake, because if he's not even getting a throw off or he's just getting sacked and hit constantly, I'm not throwing my first round rookie quarterback out there for any reason. So that is that. After the game, Drake Maye, addressed the injury update on Jacoby Brissett, and he said that it doesn't seem like a serious injury. It seems like Jacoby avoided any sort of serious structural injury to his shoulder, and he also said that the plan anyway was to play Jacoby only 1 or 2 drives, and he said that he actually could have gone out there if it was a regular season game and tried to play through it, but it is the preseason. There's not too much writing on it as of right now, so he felt that it was safer to just sit him, throw Drake Maye out there, and they didn't lose a beat. Arguably played a little bit better, had some more excitement in their play, and now it comes the decision, right? Now comes, when do we decide on who the quarterback is going to be, and what does that mean for this team, right? Because teams are making their final roster cuts tomorrow by 4 p.m. Eastern time, and both of these guys are obviously going to make the team, but that is pretty much the last sort of landmark or milestone, if you will, for these teams to, get everything in line, know who's going to be on your team, right, finally, and then, the next week starts the official work week, right? You're going to have a few more days after you make the roster cuts, and then you start getting into regular season mode. And once you do that, you need to know who your starting quarterback is going to be. So, to me, similar to the Steelers, I would probably anticipate an answer no later than towards the end of this week, obviously, but at the earliest, maybe by Wednesday or even Thursday, if Drake Maye feels inclined to already know the answer by then. I feel like he has a good idea of who it could be. He actually said today, or late Sunday, that that Drake Maye actually, you could say, outplayed Jacoby Brissett in the preseason, or at least after spring training, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Jacoby is still not going to start, which I thought was a little confusing just because, again, I'm still on the side of not starting Drake, but in that same breath, the idea of Drake Maye seemed to have been that if you, like he said, outplay somebody, you've earned that spot to start. So if he's saying that Drake outplayed Jacoby, at least in the preseason, then you would start to think that Drake is going to start, but even still, I feel like most people, we talked about Alex Van Pelt's comments last week on who should start, and he felt that Jacoby was in a better spot in terms of knowing what to do with this offense, how to get out of certain situations. But after these comments, it just seemed a little more confusing now as to what he means by, outplaying and whether or not that's going to have an impact on who ends up being the starter. So, that was one of the last things I saw on this quarterback competition, on addressing this position battle, if you will, for the Patriots. And again, the season is going to be what it is. The Patriots, I think, actually, I saw today while I was looking at the schedules for some of these teams, that the Patriots have the hardest schedule of any last place team last year that finished last in their division. So not too much riding on that, not too much hope, I guess you could say, for a lack of better terms. I don't want to be too down on the Patriots, but with that being the case, and presumably playing a lot of tough opponents, I don't think it hurts waiting on this decision to start Drake Maye. And the later you start him, again, I feel like it wouldn't really affect the overall view of this team, but that's just me. There are some exciting pieces that they are going to work slowly into, like Jalen Polk is looking great. Javon Baker is another receiver that's looking great. If you can have all those guys sort of grow together and start to play around the same time as each other, I think that's one of the best case scenarios for this team at this point in time. So that's where the quarterback battle stands. That's where the Patriots and Drake Maye stand on who is going to start. Leave your guys' thoughts, too, on who you guys believe should start and who you think will actually start based on what Drake Maye is going to do. But for right now, that'll be all on the Patriots and their quarterbacks. And for the last segment coming up after this break, we're going to talk about Ja'Marr Chase, another wide receiver. We started with a wide receiver, now we're going to end with Ja'Marr Chase returning to the Bengals practice yesterday for the first time this offseason. And what could that mean, for him and his contract situation? And now that CeeDee Lamb got his extension, what could it mean if in his extension, and what sort of area that means for Ja'Marr Chase and the Cincinnati Bengals? But after that, we're going to get into that after this break, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Thank you for joining me back here on the show to discuss some other wide receivers, another wide receiver, I should say, not CeeDee Lamb. We already addressed that at the beginning of this show, but in similarly big news, Ja'Marr Chase returns to the Cincinnati Bengals practice just yesterday after, this entire time not holding out like CeeDee Lamb, but rather holding in an attempt to try and get a contract extension, basically with the Bengals and their situation just this year. They still had 2 years technically on the deadline to try and extend Ja'Marr Chase, and obviously knowing anything about Ja'Marr and how successful he has been as soon as he stepped in to the NFL and with the Cincinnati Bengals, and anybody knows really, that this guy is going to get one of those top earning contracts. But what became so tricky about this situation was the fact that, there was so much time left, and the amount of money that we're talking about, especially now, like I said before, with this news about CeeDee Lamb, breaking just today, how does that affect Ja'Marr Chase? Maybe he came back to practice thinking that a contract was going to get done, but now, unexpectedly, this contract for CeeDee Lamb gets done, and maybe it stops everything. Maybe he has a second opinion on what his deal really should be based on what CeeDee Lamb got. But, just staying on Ja'Marr Chase returning to practice, great news, obviously, for the Bengals having their star wide receiver there, because especially with so little time left for the start of the regular season, and mentioning just in the last segment how the Patriots were trying to figure something out, they're actually going to play the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 1. So having Ja'Marr Chase out there, 13 days left to go to the start of the regular season, now is when you really like to get some of these players, right? You know, you mentioned CeeDee Lamb. He's going to be back this week. Ja'Marr obviously returns this week. You look at a guy like Brandon Ayuk. I just finished saying that we should get a resolution on his situation this week if he is going to play in Week 1. You also look at another guy like Trent Williams, same team. He's holding out, not holding in like Brandon Ayuk. So this should be the week that a lot of emphasis, and there should be more urgency by these teams to get their star players back ultimately. But on just Ja'Marr Chase, this is big because not only is he the guy for the Bengals, but that relationship he has with Joe Burrow and things like that. This season, there's a lot riding on it, I feel like. With T. Higgins and his situation, Trey Hendrickson looking for another contract or restructuring of his deal, that it's going to need a lot of emphasis and a lot of urgency just on this year to really get to a point where everybody kind of expects them to be. You know, if you're talking about the Bengals, you're talking about Joe Burrow actually playing. You expect conference championship almost. I don't think he's missed getting to the conference championship in any of his seasons that he has been mostly healthy. So that should tell you everything you need to know about what the Bengals' goals are for this year. And without Ja'Marr Chase, similarly to Joe Burrow, without one or the other, you're not going anywhere. So it's great news that Ja'Marr came back, holding in this entire time. And Ja'Marr Chase is technically entering the 4th year of that 4-year, $30 million rookie contract. And he is trying to get that extended, obviously, because I think he's set to make about $4.6 million this year, before next year it bumps up to I think it was around $17 million or something like that on his 5th-year option. So imagine having Ja'Marr Chase, obviously, as a coach or as a franchise, and only having to pay not even $5 million for his service. It's crazy. It's crazy for the Bengals, and they have to take advantage of that as much as possible. But in regards to what this means for a contract, does this mean that the Bengals and Chase are in a good spot where he feels that a contract is going to get done, so he might as well return to practice? Ja'Marr Chase and Zach Taylor, the head coach for the Bengals, haven't really talked too much about it. Both of them have been pretty much mute about it this entire offseason. Zach Taylor hasn't mentioned anything about it. Ja'Marr Chase, from my knowledge and understanding, hasn't been in any interviews or anything like that talking about his extension, like maybe Brandon Ayuk might have on social media or on podcasts or anything like that. So he's been kept pretty quiet about it. Both sides have, and it does suggest that both of them are on good terms, which is obviously positive. But I feel like this is good news, obviously. But after the word and reports that we got last week that we talked about, Chad Ochocinco mentioning that he wouldn't be hesitant about holding out, or also that just the uncertainty around all of this getting worse potentially. There was those worries there, obviously, and yes, it is a little bit more positive, but even still, I have my doubts about it. I still have some doubts that this isn't 100% certain that maybe Ja'Marr's just going to re-sign or just 100% going to play. I think it is certainly positive, but I don't know. I just feel like there is a little bit more to this. I just wasn't expecting Ja'Marr to return already. If anything, it was going to be later this week, but to me, it just feels like it doesn't say too much. While it is still positive, it technically doesn't rule him out from not playing. If you really think about it, he could be returning thinking that it could affect or speed up the contract negotiations, but at the end of the day, if he really doesn't want to play because he's not going to be earning as much as he obviously should be based on the value that he brings this team, he could just say that he's not going to play, and he is going to be practicing with the team, sort of a different sort of holdout that we have with the quarterbacks or anything like that. But he still could technically not play, if he decides not to, almost in a way of showing up, showing the Bengals like, hey, I'm going to be a good sport about it. I'm going to be ready for you guys and for the scenario that I do have to play or a contract does get done. But if nothing does get done and I still show up and I'm still trying to be a bigger person or trying to take the first step in these negotiations, I'm just not going to play. Simple as that. So, again, it is a little bit still murky, I would say, with Ja'Marr and where they stand with the Cincinnati Bengals. But it does alleviate some of the fears, obviously, right? Having him there participating, at least he's not just sitting there doing nothing. And, you know, playing for so little is still pretty risky for Ja'Marr Chase, right? Because if you do end up playing, and I'll still be pretty surprised if he does that on such little salary, it is still a risk for him, right? Because obviously this year you want to put so much into it. You want to get back to playing in the playoffs, competing in it, especially after missing out last year and now having Joe Burrow back. Hopefully he stays healthy, and you want to take advantage of all those opportunities that you have out there, right, with Joe, trying to win games and trying to be that dominant team that you were so early on. But, you know, there's no guarantees and there's no security there with that contract, especially for Ja'Marr Chase, because say he gets hurt or anything like that, hopefully that doesn't happen. But, you know, now it throws everything into a loop, and he's the one that ends up losing, right? Because he can't go out there and prove that he deserves this market-setting, resetting contract because he's going to be on the sidelines potentially. So it is a risk, really, if you're Ja'Marr Chase. You know, obviously a lot of players, a lot of people will say that Ja'Marr Chase is acting like a diva or something like that. How could he be sitting out and sitting in potentially if he has still so much time left on his contract? Like, this isn't the type of star player I want. All that sort of stuff. You know, playing football is dangerous. There comes a lot of risks, obviously, playing football. And if you're not getting paid accordingly, especially for how much you mean to the Cincinnati Bengals, like I just said, no Joe Burrow, not good, obviously. No Ja'Marr Chase, just as bad if you don't have your star wide receiver out there, especially in this scenario for the Bengals. So it is a little bit risky for Ja'Marr and also the Bengals if you're still riding on that risk that he still might not play. So it seems positive right now, but really, at the end of the day, it almost doesn't change anything. But hopefully, for the Bengals and just this entire situation, something gets ironed out this week. It will be pretty unprecedented just over the last few deals that we've seen to have it come so early, but that's the kind of pressure that Ja'Marr Chase is applying to the Bengals. So it certainly is there, and we'll see how it all plays out as we go on through this week. But this week has started off pretty exciting, obviously, with CeeDee Lamb and the quarterback battles getting hopefully towards their end here as the week goes on. But that's pretty much all I have for you guys on this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for hanging out with me. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, and check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel. If you want to see more content around this show, go check out both of those, and also follow the network on all forms of social media. And lastly, remember to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time to join me on more live shows discussing all the NFL storylines and any sort of breaking news that we have in the NFL each and every weekday. Thank you again for joining me on today's show. I will see you guys all hopefully tomorrow for some more news around the NFL.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that great.